am good. I am refreshed. I am loving this pleasant fall weather and the colors all around, and it's making
Yeah,
me feel colorful.
you survived camping.
I survived camping. I know it was, I would say it was one of the first fall camping trips I've had. So it was interesting setting up the tent and then, trying to inflate an air mattress and then sleeping in the cold. But it was so fun.
And you've been busy because you also were emceeing for the IAB.
I was. So IB had an e-commerce event. It was a 3-day event, and I emceed day 2, which was on the 23rd of last week.
Yeah.
Was a packed day of sessions about data, tech, and loyalty. And for me personally, I learned so much from these experts in the industry. They were talking about all the insights. They were talking about how we can proceed in the future considering our situation right now. And with e-commerce also, while a lot of companies are doing well, it's so unpredictable. No one has planned for next year because no one knows what next year can be like.
Yeah.
It's much difficult when you're just walking into the dark.
Yeah, it's crazy, but that makes me all the more excited for the guests that you're bringing on.
Yes.
Because we're going to learn a lot about how CMOs talk to CFOs and get to the money side of things. So
yeah, we're bringing together money and marketing today.
Yeah. So, no, why don't you introduce Mo?
Hello. So we have Mo Dezyanian. He is the president of Empathy Inc. They are BCMA Canada members, and their campaign for Zircoa vodka, in fact, has been selected for the BCMA Lockdown Showcase, where campaigns from across the world are being celebrated for their creativity. And this is one of them from Canada. So it's a great thing. And Mo is a specialist in talking about how we can mix finance with marketing, how we can understand both, balance both, and especially in these times, how we can proceed by being beneficial to both. So I felt that it's the perfect time to chat to him and bring him on board and ask him a ton of questions.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And I've got Mo on the line right now, so I'm going to bring him in. Oh,
good morning, everybody. How are you?
Good morning.
Good. How are you doing?
Very well.
You excited for the chat?
I definitely am. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I was trying to log on.
It looks like you're about to take off in an airplane, which I find very exciting.
How so?
It feels like we're going on a trip.
Ground control to Mo. Ground control to Mo. We are ready for takeoff.
Takeoff.
Tell us, Mo. Tell us. I've given you a short introduction, but we'd like to hear from you about who you are, what you do, what does Empathy Inc. do?
For sure. So I'm Mo Dezyanian, and I run Empathy Inc. We're a media consulting agency. So we have our clients manage their investment in media into the market. And I'm super excited to be here, part of this talk.
Yeah, well, one thing that made me very excited was your campaign for Zircoa. Not just that I, tend to enjoy a drink here or there, but yeah, I thought it was really brilliant, and I'd love for you to tell us more about it, especially since you've been shortlisted globally. You're representing, so it was great work, and yeah,
thank you.
A little bit more.
Congratulations!
Thank you. Yeah, so that was a really fun campaign for us to work on. I think when we first got the brief for that campaign and the ideation around it, we loved what the brand stands for. Their tagline is be yourself, mix well with others. So our insight and our challenge at the same time was, how do we project a brand? How do we represent a brand that has so much personality and promotes so much individuality, yet at the same time promotes this togetherness? And then how do we do it in a world where togetherness is a little bit of a tricky subject with COVID and everything else? So we really had to put our thinking caps on to figure out something for this brand. Little known fact about it though, what had happened is we had actually designed this campaign prior to COVID.
Oh,
Oh,
right.
So when COVID had happened, this entire campaign had a completely different shape. And then just as we were about to launch, we were a couple of weeks out for sort of pulling the trigger and getting everything lined up. COVID happened, so we had to all pause, take a breath, and reimagine what it looks like without abandoning the core the core insight and the core brief of it. So that was a fun little
Yeah.
fun little exercise for us
yeah.
too, because we
Like,
had to, yeah.
well, I was going to say you had to set up your shoot differently, obviously, right? And
Exactly. We want these creators to create their own and express their own individuality and what it means to be yourself, what makes well with others. Um,
yeah, it
we
was
wanted to
brilliant.
create it on their
Yeah.
own. We want to really give them the creative freedom to go out and say, here's what we're trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
What does that mean for you?
Yeah.
And I think they did brilliantly.
Oh, they did. It was
was.
a brilliant spot, and we'll make sure to push that out as well too.
Yeah, it's
And
an
especially
amazing
Absolutely.
one.
send people to the BCMA site.
Amazing, yeah. Like I think one of the things that was really fun for us is so the video that we have with you guys that we submitted was the free label making music with the vodka bottles.
Yeah, it also shows how creators can come together and do
Yeah.
something brand that's entertaining, that's good branded content, and that's something that is true to both them and the brand.
It was really fun to kind of vet all of these fresh ideas out of nowhere and yeah, get people to kind of really be creative. And I gotta say, it was very shout outs to the brand and the brand managers over at Zerkova who gave us that creative freedom, because it's not an
Mhm.
easy thing for someone who's built a brand over time to now all of a sudden say, yeah, let's just put it out in the world and see what people think.
It needs both trust and a desire to push the brand forward in all
Exactly.
circumstances. And I think that's great. And that brings me to my first question,
Yeah.
the next question, which is when it comes to marketing and advertising, we always talk about creativity. We talk about efficiency. We talk about data. We talk about all of these things which are in some way related to each other. But the one topic that's very rarely spoken about is finances. We will talk about a media budget, for example, but we are never going deeper than that and talking about how marketing can go hand in hand with the finance and accounting department.
Mhm.
So, what is the first step to this discussion and conversation within organizations, outside organizations for marketers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think maybe we use our campaign as an example, but part of the work that we had to do was to go and have conversations with the people in charge of finance to basically convince them to, go out and spend a bunch of money on stuff that you don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
And I think what we did really well, and we went all the way to the board for something like that, to do something like that really well, the first step is having conversations with the finance counterparts, the people who are, for lack of a better word, signing the checks, um, and having those conversations in a way that they understand and that resonates with them. At the end of the day, they have objectives, they have plans for the business that are measured in cycles. Those cycles be weekly sales, be it quarters, be it annual performance, whatever that is. And so translating this marketing speak that we have and having that conversation with them into whatever makes them check those boxes of performance and their expectations of their business, and being able to have that conversation openly and honestly. At the end of the day, we all have to get everybody in our company signed off on this idea, because if everybody isn't buying into it, then it just isn't going to work. It just
Yeah.
isn't enough for marketers to say this is a good idea.
It's honest conversations versus just
Yeah,
conversing over spreadsheets and going, here is my budget and here is
exactly.
3 months, right? Just sitting down and saying, person to person, let's talk about this.
Let's talk about it. Let's set expectations, because
Yeah.
here's the thing, like reality is, as marketers, there's just often a lot of things that we just don't know.
Yeah.
right? We can look at sort of what we did in the past and what other people are doing in the industry and all of that. And we can say, we anticipate this is going to turn out this way, but gosh, like nobody could have anticipated that we were going to be in the middle of a lockdown as we're trying to launch the program. So,
Yeah.
there's just certain things we don't know.
Yeah, and without the conversation, it's such a struggle because, the finance team wants to, make sure that there's cash flow for the business, but you also still need to be out there, and that means spending money. So it really causes quite a predicament if you don't talk to each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of cash flow and speaking
Yeah.
of budgets, I was reading a joke the other day that budget is an orderly system for living beyond your means. So when it comes to budgeting, it's an orderly system to do more than you could have within that money. It's about maximizing that money. When in these times they're being cut drastically, and marketing is usually the first to go.
Yeah.
That proof of that. How can marketers manage this situation and work with finance teams so that both can be benefited? And how can they understand the point of view of a finance person? I remember you were mentioning about cash flow, for example, and you had some other great ideas that marketers can do. So what can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we went out, we were wondering about the same thing. So this was actually again before COVID, but we had to pivot things quite a bit in the past 6 months. But so we went out and we did this study. We asked a bunch of marketers, heads of marketing, of how they react to a crisis when it comes to budgets. How do they even set the budget before a crisis? And how do they talk and converse with finance to get sign off on how much money they can spend in the market, because marketing really is a discipline of spending money for the better part. And then we went out and we asked a bunch of heads of finance the exact same questions of what do you think of that? And there was some interesting insights there. So one of the biggest ones that we talked about and we found out is, so when a crisis comes about, and the COVID crisis is an interesting one because it has material impact on revenue. So just revenues are down. So that's an interesting one. And then even the demand in the market is also down. So even if you could produce products and goods, there's certain things that people just can't use because you're in a lockdown, because you're just not in a position to consume. So across the board, there's less money coming into the organization, right? What happens on the finance side, so a head of finance, a chief financial officer, CFO, they will go ahead and default to cash flow management, which is what they're trained to do, which is their responsibility. That's what they need to do to keep the business afloat. That's what they need to do to make sure that everybody survives this pandemic and this crisis. So in very practical terms, what happens is they will look at the bank account and say, okay, we have this much money in the bank. We cannot spend more than what we have in the bank. Like very, very simple, simplistic terms. Versus in times of boom, they may look at, well, yes, we have this much money, but we can also borrow and investors, and there's other ways to get money through the door. So we don't have to worry about how much money we have in the bank today. So they look at how much money they have in the bank as the runway. Funny enough, marketers don't tend to think like that, right? So we had like 65% of CFOs told us, yeah, it's just all about cash when a crisis comes. Marketers think about profit and cost metrics, which basically doesn't really talk about how much cash you have in the bank, but looks like cutting expenses, right? So if my expenses are low, then I have a bigger profit margin, right? Also, interesting enough, marketers think about the brand. They think about what is this spending today how is it going to affect our brand 6 months down the road, a year down the road. Finance doesn't really care about that. They're again just looking at how much money do we have in the bank. If we don't have it, we cannot spend it, right? So in that, it's really interesting for us because one of the things that we talk about to marketers is sometimes cutting your expense doesn't actually solve the problem for finance at all, right? Just because you're saying, I'm not going to do this program that doesn't mean that you don't have to pay for it right away. So a really easy solution sometimes is to go to your suppliers, to your vendors, and negotiate better payment terms with them in a crisis and say, look, we want to do this program. We just won't pay for it right now. We'll pay for it 6 months, a year down the road. And yes, there's a cost to that. So it's not for free. Like, we might be paying you more down the line, but let's talk about that. And of course, that isn't always that simple. It's not always the solution, but not having the conversation means finance is going to tell you, well, you don't have the money to do this. But what if you go to finance and say, yeah, I know we don't have money right now, but what if we do this program anyways, and then we don't have to pay for it like 6 months from now, right?
Yeah, anything to get them to spend the money.
Yeah.
But that is a great tactic.
Yeah.
That's a very simple one, right? And
Yeah.
again, these things can be a little bit more complex in terms and et cetera, but again, that's a first start, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes could be as simple as that. Because we know if you don't spend the money, if you go dark in a crisis, then the recovery is going to be that much slower on the other end.
Well, that's just it. Like, brands can't stand by and do nothing, but at the same time, it is how do they go about getting the money released when it's being held on to, just
Correct.
to maintain their brand voice,
Absolutely.
and identity out there.
Yeah, and from a marketing point of view, I think this is another way to look at the finance department as a customer, and you have to get the insights on how they think and what they're doing. Right now, they're only thinking about cash flow. Great. How can we manage with that and communicate with them?
Mm-hmm.
Just keeping it one way and just sharing stuff with them and then saying, they're not giving me money.
What is the purpose of branding and marketing?
Yeah, so we talked about this briefly. I came across a paper by University of Chicago and I believe Texas. This was back in 2008, and this is the only one of its kind that I've ever seen. And I'm starting to really subscribe to this, to this thinking that the real true purpose of marketing at the end of the day, whatever marketing activity you do, the true purpose of it is to improve your cash position. Right. A lot of people think about marketing as a sales driver, and we talk about sort of ROI, the infamous 3 letters, the return on investment or revenue on investment or something like that. But I actually think that a lot of it isn't about revenue at all. A lot of it is about protecting your cash position so that you can do more and you can grow the business. So let me give you a couple of examples. So we always talk about a brand. Like, what does a brand do? Brand is a promise to deliver something to the consumers, right? But what does it actually accomplish for the business? So a brand does a couple of things at its very fundamental core. It decouples your day-to-day marketing from your sales. A prime example, if Coca-Cola stops advertising today, spends 0 money in the market, they're still going to sell a product, right? If BMW tomorrow says, we don't want to spend a dime advertising, they're still going to sell BMWs. Yes, part of it is the infrastructure and the sales teams and all of that, but part of it is the brand. There's going to be people that will buy Coke and buy BMWs no matter how many times you tell them, because they just believe in the brand and they like it, they associate with it. So that one of the things that it does for the business, it makes your sales less dependent on spending money directly into advertising, right? And I think that's a really powerful business tool, right?
It is, and it's a great way to explain branding and long-term brand awareness to anyone.
Totally.
It's so difficult, even when I try to talk to people about the importance of branded content, what the BCMA does, what we all do, longevity. They don't exactly understand why it is important, and this is perfectly put.
Yeah, I think it's an eye opener. A lot of times we see that a lot when people spend I suppose the term for it is called performance marketing, quotes, which is, you spend money to drive sales, and that's great. The challenge is you always have to spend the money to drive the sales. So the second that you don't, let's say in a crisis, but you don't have the money to spend it, then your sales also tank, right? But if you have
Yeah.
a fan base or brand already, then your sales don't drop as drastically. The other thing
It's
that a brand does really, really well is it allows you to set the market price for yourself. So again, going back to like BMW partly can charge what they charge per car because they have the brand.
Yeah.
Without the brand, they wouldn't be able to determine what the price is. So you can now, if this is your price and this is your sort of costs, now you can start to push this line up a little bit instead of pulling this line down, right? And the gap between the two, of course, is how much money you make and how healthy it is, and that's your cash differential, right?
Well, like for brands that aren't the BMWs, it to me it does make sense to try and sell them on unique ways to market themselves that
Yeah,
create longevity and really create a sense of not just brand awareness, but for having consumers out there, people who are watching their content, be able to really trust that brand and
absolutely.
right? And that, because I just find that is always going to be a better option than just trying to advertise.
Absolutely.
it's the opposite of short-termism, right? Because a
Yeah,
lot of companies go into short-termism, go into immediate sales, but this is more like running a marathon. You have to build endurance for the brand over time so that you can make it all the way.
exactly. And all of those
I love
things at the end of
metaphors.
the absolutely though, but all of those things at the end of the day improve your cash position. It just means you have
Yes.
more money in the bank to do whatever else that your company needs to do to move to the next level, be that you know research and development, be that more higher, whatever it is that your grander objectives are. All of that, setting the price, making sure your sales don't dip if there's a crisis, making sure that frankly you're not as price sensitive, right? Sometimes you have to drop your price or increase your price, but not losing all of your customers just
Right.
because you vibrated your pricing model a little bit. Now, if you have a brand, you're a little bit protected.
Being in these times of COVID, and then post COVID, there's increasing stresses on all the teams. So what should be kept in mind?
Yeah, I think the crux for all of this is, well, I mean, I believe in it because I named my company after it. It's empathy, right? They're all just people at the end. They all have their individual goals, aspirations, wants, needs, their individual challenges and struggles. The more of any of those that you understand, the more fruitful you can have a business relationship. Right? I've always talked about how business isn't at all just business. It's always personal, even in a boardroom, even
Oh,
more so in a boardroom.
yeah, even more so. And I mean, it really, that term, like looking at employee experience, and making that more of a
Yeah,
focus. And I liked, Haem, what you had mentioned about viewing the financial team, let's say, as a customer, like reframing how we look, because we all are at everything, and I think especially now, people are able to communicate a little bit easier instead of trying to get that meeting, with the big company and go into the, right. It seems like much more of a, you're a person, I'm a person. We're all kind of going through this
yeah.
time together. So I feel like it's breaking down barriers and walls even more.
I
So we
think
can keep
so.
moving. Yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
as a horrible of a situation COVID, of course, is, I think the one silver lining that I've seen in business is that just the very fact that you get to now see into people's sort of lives and homes a little bit. It's made
Mhm.
everything a little bit more personal
Yeah,
than it was
absolutely.
before. Like before, you would come to the office, you'd go to the meeting, and right, you wouldn't know what that person looks like outside of
Yeah.
that framework or outside of those four walls. But now, being on a call with someone that's, fairly high up in an organization, you're trying to make some big decisions, and like their kid walks in front of the camera, or you can see
Exactly.
like the kitchen in the background, and you're like, man, you're living through the same thing I am.
it's always nice to know, while we talk about these concepts and theories, sometimes examples just ground them. So examples of companies that have managed to do something like that,
Mhm.
especially during those COVID times.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really neat examples how you can use your brand and you can use your marketing efforts to just elevate your company. So we have a manufacturing company. It's one of our clients, and like one of the things they did really well, and I'm sure if we talked about this before or not, but one of the things they did is they retrofitted their manufacturing plants to make PPE for the market, and they're sort of
Okay.
furniture manufacturers, so they have no that's not directly their line of business, and they don't really, it's not their part of their core set of skills, but they're like, we're making couches and that's sewing material together. It's like, it's kind of right, we have the skill sets in the sewing machine, so let's do that for a while. So I think that's an example of a brand that can truly stand behind what they believe in, which is like they want to be in this community of Ontarians that kind of moves everything forward. They want to work for society, and they stand for something bigger.
Yeah.
So let's put their money where their mouth is a little bit, right? So I think that was like a really neat example, and we're super proud to be with those guys and help them through all of this too. So sometimes when you kind of look at this whole personal aspect of business and you look at what decisions people make, sometimes when smart people get in the room, they have these really neat ideas of doing things that's not just good for their business, but it's also good for the greater good of everybody else.
We've been speaking from a finance point of view. Till now, we're trying to understand what the finance person thinks, but speaking from a marketing point of view, how can more be achieved while being considerate of this tight budget and cash flow? Because one of these things is what you said, which is brand value and show up. What else can marketers do?
Yeah, I think one of the things we found out in our study, which is not surprising at all, like I think it's something that we all knew, but we just never really pointed our fingers or put our fingers down on that nerve, which is we have a tendency, and I don't know why that happened or how it came about. I don't have any insight into that, but it's just we have a tendency of being in our own, for lack of a better word, bubble as marketers. Like we kind of speak our own language, we talk about things a certain way, but what we need to do now, especially in this time, is we need to sort of break that bubble a little bit. And like the very pragmatic answer to that is, let's start with our language. We just, as marketers, need to start speaking the language of the organization in total versus just marketing speak. Right. And we've talked about a couple of sort of examples right now in the past where, for example, we talk about things like brand awareness, right? So that's kind of one of those things that are a little bit vague in our repertoire of marketing. So we need to change that language a little bit, right? Or we talk things like brand loyalty, something you mentioned, right? So we go to a sort of a finance person and say, well, we're creating more brand loyalty. But what a finance person will tell you is one of the metrics they evaluate is customer churn, right? That's a sort of a standard business speak of how you evaluate these things. So if I go to a CFO and say, I'm going to reduce customer churn by doing this, 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 and that, what I'm saying is I'm going to increase the loyalty to my brand, but it's just I'm saying it in a different way. And that resonates with them, and that makes them feel like, oh, we're on the same team and we're talking about the same things, right? Another example is we talk about sort of working versus non-working media dollars, right? So we all know what that means. So working dollars is the money that you invest into the actual media buy, and then non-working is the money that you invest in the content that you put in that media buy, right? Again, to a finance person or the rest of the organization, that doesn't really mean much. That's very specific marketing speak. Instead, what we could be saying is asset creation, and everybody in your organization knows what an asset is. It's something that you own, that you created, and it's yours, such as, for example, your creative work, your the actual assets, the ads that you've made. And then you have the promotion budget, which is the money you spend to promote those assets, right? So I think the big thing for marketers is to break that language barrier down. And then the second thing is, can we please just simplify marketing? why are we making it so complicated? Some of this stuff does not have to be that complicated. It's very simple. It's you have a message, you have a customer that needs something, you have the product that fulfills that need, and you have a message that is entertaining, emotive, whatever it is that grabs their attention and tells them, hey, you need this thing and we have it. Let's just make it that simple.
That's how I deal with marketing. I like things real simple.
Real simple. I've seen marketing dashboards of 50 plus pages of metrics, and I've seen people in boardrooms just scratch their heads like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I was in a meeting the other day, and I know the person that was on the other side, of the table, and the decision maker. And I know, like, she has just a couple of young kids, and she's trying to figure out sort of childcare and all of that. And so, I could tell her day was a little bit rough. I think like the kids were giving her a hard time. And I try to put myself in her position. It's like, so you wake up, you have 2 little ones, you're just hustling to get them in or out of the house or whatever her arrangement is, and figuring out day school and all of that. And then you show up to this meeting, and this person is throwing like a bunch of numbers at you that you're not in marketing, so you don't understand them. And there's this like 14 pages of dashboards, and they're asking you, like, what do we do based on this copious amount of data? And you just like, I can't deal, right?
We need to Marie Kondo marketing. I think that's
really what it is. And you
just roll it up.
The point though is we try and pitch and sell ideas through. Is to remember to speak a general language, to be simple, simplistic, simplify things. And remember, it's about like person to person, and it's about the experience within like the organization and with your customer. Like it's human centric.
Absolutely.
I mean, and humans are emotional beings, and I think a lot of times people tend to get that. They tend to get involved in this 40 pages of data, like you said, and forget that the end of that data, that consumer is a person, and they'll have their whims and fancies and likes and dislikes.
Yes. So just give them 2 options, tell them the pros and cons, let them pick 1 or 3 options, and that's all you need. And then, but I mean, there's this general principle that there is just a lot of profit to be made by introducing complexity, right? It's that's generally true. Like if you tell someone this is too much and you won't understand it, just let me deal with it. There is a lot of, but oftentimes it doesn't have to be that way. But you're just overwhelming the other decision maker on the other end.
Or feeling like you have to provide an overage of data to show value in the work that you're doing or proposing. And that's not always, now there is a place for data for sure.
Of course, yeah.
But it needs to be aggregated in such a way that's not going to make the other person zone out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the good fight that I'm fighting. But
you fight the good fight.
Yes.
You ready for some rapid fire questions?
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Can we do them really, really fast?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll start, then you go in. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Mo, what was your last treat to yourself?
I'm getting new shirts made. I have a tailor and I haven't had new shirts in a while, so I'm going to treat myself to that.
That's good. We like to see
I'm tired of sweatpants. I'm tired of sweatpants working from home.
I know. I wore a little dress today. Hey,
I like getting dressed. Okay, so we're talking about simplifying things. What are the 3 possessions you could have on an island if you were stranded? Just 3.
I don't have 3, but if I have a pen and a paper, I'll be fine.
Okay.
Brilliant. I love it. I love a nice pen and a nice clean
pen and a paper. And
I miss those fountain pens that we used to have. I'm a writer.
These guys?
I love writing with those pens because when I'm writing poetry or prose or something like that, that's the pen I want to use.
It's just a different feel.
Soft. Okay, just a couple more questions.
Yes.
Sure.
And you think of one, I think of, okay, what made you smile today?
This conversation in general. It's fun to talk to fun people.
We're way more fun than this, just so you know. Like, we're way more fun than this. Okay, Haem, go for it.
Once lockdown ends, what's the first thing you'll do when you can go and do everything?
Sorry, could you come again?
Once lockdown ends and you can go out and do everything, what's the first thing you'll do?
I'd like to go back to a nice restaurant again without the anxiety.
Yes.
I mean, I've been to a patio just I think once during lockdown, but just going there in a crowded restaurant with a bunch of people around, like the energy.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you
So
so
listen,
much,
yeah.
Mo.
Thank you
This
guys.
was a pleasure. It
It was
was
lovely.
nice having this on a Monday morning and brightening me up at least.
Yeah.
Likewise. Yeah, it starts off the week right.
It definitely did. It was, and we learned a lot. So
Yes.
really thank you for that.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah. Well, enjoy the rest of your week. And I'm going to sign us all off now.
Absolutely. You too, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.